Now, just to remind our viewers, the Israeli Prime Minister is charged with fraud, breach of trust and accepting bribes in 3 separate cases, which accuse him of exchanging favors with wealthy political supporters. To discuss this further, I'm now being joined live by Alex Treman, who's the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief of a Jewish News Syndicate from Jerusalem. And I'm also being joined by Chris Doyle, Director of Council for Arab-British Understanding and West Asia Analyst, joining me from London. Mr. Treman, let me start with you. You believe Netanyahu needs a pardon. But can Netanyahu be pardoned from his corruption charges? The Israeli president's office called the request for pardon extraordinary with significant implications. Mr. Treman.
Well, absolutely. The request is extraordinary. Also, the case itself is extraordinary. The Prime Minister has charged that the evidence collected in the case was illegally collected, wouldn't be admitted in a court of law in other Western countries, that the state witnesses were blackmailed into their testimony, and that also the prosecution chose to leak what it presented as evidence during election cycles, specifically implying that the cases themselves were politically motivated in order to convince Israelis not to vote for Netanyahu. Meanwhile, the court has forced the prosecution on 3 separate occasions to change their charge sheet, which in the United States would have amounted to 3 separate mistrials. Even at the end of their presentation of the case, the court told them that they had no case of fraud, and the prosecution said that they would only be able to prove the fraud in the cross-examination when the defense presented its case. This case has moved on for now several years, and the court has forced Netanyahu to begin testifying up to 4 days a week, significantly hampering his ability to serve in his position as the Prime Minister.
Mr. Doyle, let me come to you next. Now, as Mr. Treman said, that he considers it extraordinary, an extraordinary request, but because there seems to be like a witch hunt against Netanyahu. Mr. Doyle, your views on this?
Well, I think that the judicial process in any democracy, any country that claims proper rule of law should be allowed to continue. So the proper process here would be that the judicial authorities should be continuing to take the trial forward. If there is a case, as is argued by your guest, that it be dropped or there's a mistrial, then that should be happening. What shouldn't happen is that a president, an honorific figure, has pressure put on him, including by a foreign head of state, to issue a pardon when even the legal process hasn't gone forward to establish guilt or not, and there is no remorse from the Israeli Prime Minister. And that's an extraordinary situation. And I've always been somebody who's critical, for example, of the powers of the US president to grant pardons. So I think this would send out a message that the Prime Minister in Israel was above the law, that he could use political pressure to push away serious charges. It's a trial here. He's the first Prime Minister to be indicted in Israeli history. And I don't think that any country that claims proper rule of law should allow this to happen.
Mr. Doyle, stay with me. Let me go over to Mr. Treman now. Alex, as Chris said, that the trial should continue, and it is on as of now. It has not concluded. In Israel, the president reviews a pardon request only after all legal proceedings have ended. Does the possibility of a pre-conviction pardon threaten the rule of law in Israel? Is the reputation of Israel's justice system at stake if a pardon is granted at this point?
No, there is a precedent many years ago, only one, but yes, a singular precedent where the president did issue a pardon before conviction. There is no clause in the law that states that the president can only issue a pardon after a conviction. Of course, the head of the opposition is calling for the pardon to be issued only if the Prime Minister admits guilt, expresses remorse, and retires from politics. And this is really his goal, is to see Netanyahu retire from politics. If Netanyahu doesn't get a pardon, he's not going to take any kind of a plea bargain in order to get to some sort of a guilty verdict in order to then get a pardon. He will go through with this trial until acquittal. He's said that for a long time, and I think it was only the President of the United States putting pressure on the president, saying, hey, why does does the prime minister of a free country need to request from the court a break in his trial in order to host the president of the United States when he comes to the country? So the court has really put very, very difficult pressures on a prime minister. In other Western countries, you cannot try a prime minister while he's sitting in office. And here, so we see a lot of irregularities. And even though this is a extraordinary request, we have to see now if the president will do it in the sake of national reconciliation rather than create political turmoil. I think that ending the trial has a possibility of actually creating national reconciliation and unity and allow Netanyahu to govern from the center instead of from the far right of the political spectrum.
Understood. Mr. Doyle, let me come to you. As Mr. Treyman, he's pointing to a precedent where a pardon has been given before legal proceedings even ended. And of course, that is also a fact that this is the first time in Israel that a sitting prime minister is being tried. What do you feel at this point? Does this compromise the justice system in Israel? Do you still see it that way, even though there is a precedent that Mr. Treyman is suggesting?
Sadly, I do think it compromises the justice system. No political leader should be above the law. You can't have a situation in which somebody is a prime minister and therefore you can't put them on trial because they may have committed a crime. Of course, that's a nonsense. If a prime minister was to go up and, say, shoot somebody, then they should be arrested and put on trial. Of course, this is crimes and bribery, etc. But actually, it's extremely important that a proper process goes through if you are going to be able to claim that the rule of law means anything in life. I mean, if you are going to stop prime ministers from perpetrating corruption and bribery, if that's the system you want, then, this must be the case and you go through the proper legal system. Now, if there are imperfections in this, if there are elements that, have not been done by the book, then that needs to be, properly exposed and held to account. But you need to go through that judicial process. And I just think that the idea also that, to be honest, I don't think sounds very credible, that President Trump made this request just out of the blue. Of course, Netanyahu knew he was going to be making a request. And of course, Netanyahu has been, asking President Trump to help him out of this situation. I mean, it really, I think in most countries, they don't like foreign leaders coming on and interfering in their political process, their elections, and certainly not in their trials.
Well, we've heard Netanyahu say that Donald Trump is the greatest greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. But keeping it there, thank you so much to Mr. Alex Treyman and Mr. Chris Doyle for joining me here. Mr. Doyle suggests that this will compromise the judicial system and belittle the legal proceedings if the pardon is given. But on the other side, Mr. Treyman suggests there is precedent in Israel that this can be done. What happens, we will need to wait and watch. But thank you so much to our guests for joining us and discussing this with me.
Thank you.